My mother-in-law stood imposingly, adopting an intimidating demeanor and a stern gaze, and stated, "You can live in our house as a helper, but you won't be accepted as—" I am Claire, 28 years old, working hard together with my husband to make a living. My husband, Scott, is 33 years old, 5 years older than me. I was attracted to his calm personality and decided to marry him. However, my mother-in-law was very concerned about our age difference. Because of her, I had some tough experiences. When I married my husband, he was very happy. As an older wife who firmly managed the household, I was highly praised by relatives. She would say, "We started a new life in an apartment soon after getting married, but my mother-in-law visited us almost every week by train. Each time we met, she would boast about being older than her husband and being praised for it. Her pride seems to be in supporting my husband well. Every time she came to boast, I felt irritation inside. Moreover, she not only bragged but began to belittle me by comparing me to herself. Humph. In our younger days, wives quit their jobs immediately after marriage to become homemakers. Aren't you planning to quit, Claire? Or are you continuing to work because you're young and unsatisfied with just my son? Seeking to play around outside, she insinuated that I was unfaithful. I am not the kind of person to have inappropriate relationships with other men while being married. It was very painful to be thought of in that way by my mother-in-law. Even witnessing these words from her, Scott did not intervene between us. He just sat on the sofa, playing with his smartphone. I thought he was very responsible, which is why I married him, but he was not fulfilling his responsibilities at home as I imagined. I am responsible for most of the housework. Since we both work, he seems to think we should share housework and occasionally helps me with simple tasks. However, his rare assistance is inefficient and poorly executed. Even if he cooks, the dishes pile up, the laundry gets color-stained, and he carelessly folds it. When he cleans, the room often ends up messier. I have to tidy up after him. But Scott seems unhappy with this. Why do you redo what I worked hard on? He shows irritation. Initially, I advised him this method works better, but that seemed to irritate him more. He dislikes following my directions, saying, "Stop nagging. I'll do it my way." Ultimately, it would have been better if he had followed my advice, but he never seemed to reflect on this. My mother-in-law has witnessed this several times and laughs, saying, "It's tough when you're young, and your husband doesn't listen. You can't assert yourself, and can't control him." It's clear that she looks down on me for being younger than my husband. But does she realize her son is a selfish and disobedient husband? After my mother-in-law leaves, Scott, red-faced, yells, "You embarrassed me in front of Mom. Do you want to shame me?" He seems to have finally realized that his mother was subtly belittling him. Hearing this, I wanted to respond, "It's your fault for being stubborn and not growing up. If you don't want to be criticized, act responsibly," I said, but he lamented, "I should have listened to Mom and chosen an older wife." Shocked, I asked, "What do you mean? Are you saying our marriage was a mistake?" He replied, "Yes, marrying you was a mistake. I wanted to surprise everyone by marrying a younger wife, but everyone said the 5-year age difference wasn't significant, so it wasn't worth it." It seems Scott chose me to boast about having a younger wife. I was astonished to learn he had such a motive for marriage. I responded to his courtship, attracted by his responsible demeanor and gentle escorting, but it was all an act to marry me. In the US, polygamy is not allowed. As long as Scott is legally married to me, marrying another woman is absolutely impossible. Nevertheless, he proudly declared, "I've decided to follow Mom's advice and marry an older, more mature wife. Olivia has always lived near my parents' home and is a reliable, big sister type. That's why I thought marrying her, a mature woman, would be better than marrying an inexperienced younger woman like you." Scott admitted he considered our marriage a failure, but I thought it was too soon for him to be looking for someone else. Moreover, planning another marriage while still married to me is unthinkable. This is clearly adultery. I was dumbfounded. Seeing my reaction, my mother-in-law started laughing. You thought you wouldn't be abandoned by a man because you're young? But you're wrong. You come home later than Scott every day, so people think you're playing around with other men. You can say anything even if your husband turns to another woman. But I told you I'm working. I'm not playing around with other men. I replied, it seems my mother-in-law really wants to believe I'm having an affair. Does she think it's okay for her son to brazenly admit to adultery because she's convinced I'm unfaithful? Maybe she's not worried about compensation for her son's affair because she's mistaken about me having one. I'm not having an affair, and if Scott is having one with Olivia, I definitely plan to seek compensation. Excuse me, but I will ask for the usual compensation for adultery. Is that okay? I said, and my mother-in-law laughed loudly. If you do that, we will demand compensation from you. Your late return to home itself is proof of adultery. She retorted. Oh, is that so? Then please consult a lawyer. I wonder if they'll take your case with that argument. I replied, and my mother-in-law left grumpily, saying, you'll regret this later. However, compensation isn't my only concern. Later, Scott and my mother-in-law brought Olivia to our house, and with his arm around her shoulder, Scott said, from now on, I plan to live in this apartment with Olivia. So, please pack your things and leave quickly. Why do I have to leave? Because this apartment is mine. Isn't that obvious? Scott said, but in reality, the apartment is in my name. I couldn't understand why he would say such a thing. This spacious apartment is unnecessary for you, right? That's why I'm saying, give it to me, he claimed. I was momentarily shocked that he told me to leave, forgetting I'm the owner, but it seemed he remembered the apartment was in my name. However, I doubted whether Scott had the ability to pay the rent. As I thought about his income, my mother enlarged me. We don't need a useless daughter-in-law like you. My son has found a wealthy wife. So leave quickly as you're told. Looking at Olivia, she had a confident expression, and I realized she would be paying the rent from now on. If that's the case, let the new wife take care of the rent. With that thought, I quickly started the procedures for changing the ownership. Olivia was a puzzling person but seemed to work for a large company, which surprised me. I understood why my husband and mother-in-law chose Olivia, financially well-off and an older, long-term acquaintance, over me. As I also wanted a divorce, I happily signed the divorce papers presented to me and left the rest of the procedures to them. I quickly organized my belongings and hired movers to take out my furniture, including the ones I bought. I took the necessary appliances, but Scott and my mother-in-law said, we'll buy new ones so you can take those. These were originally bought by me. After the busy move, I settled into a luxury apartment, but I don't intend to let this end quietly. Of course, I plan to claim compensation based on the facts of the affair and take appropriate action if those three continue living together in that apartment. With that in mind, I contacted my uncle immediately. Hello, uncle. It's been a while. It's Claire. Oh, you already know about the apartment. Yes, I'm getting divorced and have to move out. So, it's okay to return the rent to the original amount. The new wife will be paying, it seems. I was told to leave because they prefer an older wife. Actually, this apartment, though in my name, is owned by my uncle. When Scott and I were looking for a place to live after getting married, there was some room available in my uncle's apartment, and we decided to live there. Thanks to my uncle's consideration, we were living there at a lower rent than usual. I was responsible for the contract and rent payments, while Scott handled other living expenses. The rent I was paying was considerable, but returning to the normal rate meant Scott and Olivia would have to pay $3,500 each month. But Olivia, working for a large corporation, might not have a problem paying $3,500 monthly. That's not something I know for sure. Sometime after the divorce, when I claimed compensation, the amount for both of them was deposited into my account in a lump sum. I thought my involvement with Scott, Olivia, and my mother-in-law had ended, But 6 months later, I unexpectedly encountered Olivia. "Why are you here?" she said in surprise. I was in the elevator when Olivia happened to get on the same one and was startled to see me. "You're not planning to join this company, are you?" "I'm sorry, but it's impossible for you. A competent person like me is one thing, but it's impossible for an incompetent person like you. So, leave." She spat out. Then, as the elevator doors opened, she pushed me out. Thrown off balance and wearing heels, I stumbled and sprained my ankle. When the accident happened, people around rushed to help and seated me in a chair. I had a minor injury and felt deep anger towards Olivia, thinking, I can't expect anything more from her. Being injured by someone who completely misunderstood my position and purpose was unexpected. Generally, causing injury to someone else, regardless of the reason, is never acceptable, especially when done at one's workplace. She bragged about being wealthy because she worked for a large corporation, but the reality was different. I had researched her family background while investigating my husband's affair. The research revealed her parents didn't have a significant income. If she lost her job, she wouldn't be able to expect financial support from her parents, making her far from wealthy. Right after she pushed me, Olivia was called by her boss. "Why do I have to be called out by my boss because of you?" She was outraged. Her actions and words clearly displayed her self-centered nature and lack of understanding. After getting my ankle treated, I was explaining the situation to Olivia's boss in the company's reception room. While I was speaking, Olivia burst into the room, saw me, and, thinking I was the cause of her being called out, showed her anger. Her boss, angered by her attitude, scolded her loudly. "What are you thinking? What does this attitude mean? Do you know who this person is? She's the vice president of S Trading, starting business with us from today. Why would you be disrespectful to such an important person?" Her boss said. Hearing this, Olivia's eyes widened in shock, her expression showing disbelief. "Wait, you're the vice president of S Trading?" she asked me, stunned. Scott knew I worked at S Trading, but he never imagined I was the vice president. In fact, I became vice president only 6 months ago, previously holding a high position but not that of a vice president. Scott, captivated by my youth, probably didn't pay much attention to my actual income or status. On the other hand, Olivia, a regular employee at this company, seemed to have a decent income, but it still must have been less than mine. When divorcing, I deliberately didn't mention this fact. Even if I had, it wouldn't have changed the decision to divorce, and I wanted the divorce myself, so there was no need to mention it. With a serious expression, I addressed Olivia. "I never imagined you'd be someone who would injure a business partner." Olivia's face turned pale instantly at my words. Surprise and confusion were evident in her expression. Although we know each other, in this situation today, it's as if we're meeting for the first time. So I expected normal, common sense behavior. I continued calmly. Hearing our conversation, her boss, puzzled, asked, "Excuse me, Vice President, what exactly is your relationship with our employee?" I looked into his eyes and spoke the truth without hiding anything. "She is actually the current wife of my ex-husband, Scott. One day when I returned home, she and Scott were there, and Olivia told me to leave the apartment because she was the new wife. At that time, I thought I had no involvement with the company she worked for, so I didn't feel the need to inform them about the affair. However, in a situation like this, I couldn't stay silent. My boss listened to my story, unable to hide his astonishment, and said in confusion, "What does this mean?" Afterwards, he sternly instructed Olivia, "I will definitely report this matter to the management. You will be under disciplinary action for some time. Also, you are responsible for paying for the treatment of the injury." Fortunately, the injury I sustained was minor, and the treatment costs were paid promptly. Olivia's fate took a turn for the worse. She had injured an important vice president from a client company, jeopardizing a significant business deal. As a result of this incident, her credibility at the company rapidly declined. Additionally, her irrational behavior of stealing my husband, Scott, due to an affair and forcing me out of the apartment greatly damaged the company's trust. The impact of her actions at the company was severe, and as a result, she was assigned to work in the basement storage. Furthermore, this job change led to a significant reduction in her salary, making it difficult for her to pay the monthly rent of $3,500. Olivia and Scott were already living barely within their means before her salary reduction, but their living situation quickly deteriorated after the decrease in income. Later, as Olivia's situation worsened, Scott and my mother-in-law came back to me, proposing that we get back together. However, when I asked, "Is your divorce with Olivia finalized?" Scott fell silent, unable to answer. Incredibly, he had been plotting to remarry me without finalizing his divorce with Olivia. I was astonished by their unreasonable behavior. Disappointed by their repeated actions, I firmly said, "I have no intention of remarrying Scott," and sent them away. Unfortunately, Olivia, Scott, and my mother-in-law lost the comfortable apartment they once lived in and had to move to a smaller, less desirable apartment. Olivia, probably exhausted from her days as a warehouse worker, suddenly quit her job one day, declaring, "I will be a full-time housewife to support our home because I am an older wife." My mother-in-law always bragged about being a stay-at-home wife, so you can't complain about this decision. As a result, Scott, with his modest salary, had to support the three of them, leading to frequent and intense arguments between my mother-in-law and Olivia about who should work, with Scott often getting caught in the middle. Meanwhile, after the divorce, I became single and, as the vice president, felt more responsibility for my work, becoming even more dedicated, freed from the troublesome involvement with people like Scott, Olivia, and my mother-in-law. I can now focus on my career and personal growth. Based on the lessons learned from my past experiences, I decided to keep a distance from relationships and marriage for the time being. I will prioritize my happiness and stability, making wiser choices in my life ahead. "I believe you all understand," began my brother's wife. All eyes turned toward her. She felt their gaze instantly and continued, "We should not be fighting amongst ourselves over our late father's inheritance. I don't think that's what he would have wanted." She looked up at the sky for a moment. Her acting seemed exaggerated. And then she added, "It would be best for my husband, the eldest son, to inherit it for both social reasons and to avoid the conflict that our late father wouldn't have wished for." With satisfaction, she declared that my brother would inherit the estate. Everyone was astonished because, as it turned out, my brother was. Our father passed away peacefully. I believe he had a blissful departure. I am the oldest child at 36, unmarried and enjoying living alone. I have an older brother and a younger sister. Our father once established a well-known company in the area, but now only his name is registered as the nominal president, and my sister and I work there as regular employees. We live in apartments close to our workplace, conveniently located nearby our family home. Our parents are both remarried, and we are children born to our father after he turned 50. From the outside, our family might seem a bit complicated, but we are not children of infidelity. After a formal divorce from his previous wife, our father met and married our mother, who was working in a bar at that time. Despite the age gap, they got along very well and showered us siblings with love equally. To this day, we've been gathering as a family whenever possible, sharing meals and drinks, updating each other on our lives, and spending pleasant times together. As for affection, even after 30 years of marriage, my parents still showed unchanging love, which even as their child, I found wonderful. My father, especially, adored my mother deeply and was always willing to do anything to make her happy. His anniversary surprises were always creative, which made us chuckle but also feel cherished. Although he was strict at the company, he retired and became a gentle and soft presence, like a grandfather. I also have a much older brother, who has moved out and started a new life with his wife. Ever since childhood, he's been somewhat enigmatic, rarely committing to anything with perseverance, living as he pleases. Our father was deeply concerned about his future. However, my brother remained oblivious to these concerns, wandering aimlessly as ever. He left home out of the blue, brought home his current wife, and announced, "I'm engaged." The impression I had when I first met her, unfortunately, was not very good. She might be the bright and candid type. However, her remarks often carried a certain sharpness, and I felt they were somewhat disdainful. Nevertheless, my parents did not oppose the marriage, thinking, since she's the partner our son has chosen. My sister and I also refrained from commenting, hoping that this marriage would bring stability to our brother. At that time, our father was already over 80 years old. Years passed. One morning, my mother informed us that our father had collapsed during his routine walk and was rushed to the hospital in a critical condition. He had always walked for 30 minutes every morning for his health. Even though he used a cane, these walks were an essential part of his daily routine after retirement. That day was no different, and he went out as my mother started preparing breakfast. When he did not return at the usual time, my mother felt anxious. As she checked outside, a neighbor hurried over and breathlessly informed her, "Your husband has collapsed. He's being carried to the ambulance." My mother immediately rushed to the scene and joined him in the ambulance to the hospital. Soon after, I was contacted by the hospital. In a panic, I informed my brother and sister of the situation. Then, after telling my boss, I quickly headed to the hospital. When I arrived, my father was still receiving emergency treatment. My mother sat quietly in the waiting room chair as if nothing had happened. I sat next to her and patted her shoulder, praying for my father's well-being. My sister arrived shortly after, and we sat in silence, anxiously waiting for the outcome of my father's treatment. Sadly, he passed away shortly after. Considering his age, it could be said that he had lived a full life. My father had always jokingly said he wanted to leave this world suddenly, and that's exactly what happened. The situation was complex. In the end, neither my brother nor his wife showed up at the hospital. The company organized my father's funeral. The preparations were made by the staff, and we, the family, were too busy to take time to mourn. My mother appeared composed, too occupied with greeting the attendees to indulge in grief. The busyness seemed appropriate for her at the time. They were truly a loving couple. After the hectic 3 days, we finally slept, as if making up for the lack of rest we had endured. The day after the funeral, relatives gathered to discuss my late father's assets. Since my father only held an honorary position at the company, its operation remained unchanged. However, my father's private assets were substantial, totaling $7 million. It was expected that the reading of the will and the distribution of mementos would lead to nostalgic conversations. However, that thought was short-lived. An unexpected turn of events then occurred. Unexpectedly, my sister-in-law, who had been out of sight for a long time, suddenly gathered everyone's attention and powerfully announced, "There is something I must tell you all." Then she began to speak. "You may already be aware of this, but..." As the family turned their attention to her, she looked around and said, "This is about the assets left by our late father. It is hard to believe that he would have wanted any disputes among siblings over this." At that moment, she looked up toward the sky, perhaps feigning tears. Her performance seemed somewhat exaggerated to those present. She went on, "It is best, for social reasons and to avoid any discord against the wishes of our dear father, that my husband as the eldest son inherits everything. There will be no objections. Is that clear?" She proudly made her declaration. The sudden claim left everyone stunned, including my mother, sister, and the executor of the will. When my gaze shifted to my brother, I saw him sitting alone in the corner, drinking. It was unbelievable. At that moment, the lawyer, a legal professional, questioned my sister-in-law's claim and raised an eyebrow. There was a reason for his doubt. Standing up, the lawyer firmly stated, "That cannot be done." My sister-in-law retorted angrily, "Don't say unnecessary things." But she was an outsider in this matter. The lawyer, trusted by my father during his lifetime, calmly countered her. My duty is to clarify and execute the final wishes of the deceased. He then revealed a crucial fact. In this matter, the eldest son actually has no right to the inheritance. It turned out my brother was the son of my mother's previous husband and had no blood relation to our father. My father had once proposed adoption to my mother, but she declined, saying that it was enough for them to raise him as their son and that he might cause problems in the future financially. Also, she was already pregnant with me in her womb. Throughout our lives, our parents showered us with love without distinction, and our father was always willing to invest in what we wanted. However, as my mother predicted, my brother's life did not extend beyond completing his college education. Afterward, my brother, who had proclaimed his desire to be a musician, spent his time idly in the UK under the guise of training, and upon returning to the US, he never held a job for long, always relying on our father for money whenever he was in financial difficulty. When my sister-in-law learned of this fact, she screamed in outrage, "This is a joke. I married him thinking he was the son of a wealthy man." Then she confronted my brother, lashed out, and accused him, "You deceived me. I can't forgive this," while attempting to hit and kick him. Fueled by indignation toward her, I stood up and said, "Have some shame. How can you speak of avoiding disputes here in front of everyone when your intention to monopolize the inheritance is clear? Blood-related or not, he's our brother, and I will not stand by and watch him be attacked. Thieves should leave." She then turned her aggression toward me. I braced for a blow, but something unexpected happened. With a loud bang, she vanished from our sight. My brother stood there, breathing deeply. He quietly whispered to me, "Sorry, I'll handle this from now on," and took her by the hair, calmly leading her out of the room. The lawyer then read the will, which stated, "Please follow the inheritance laws as a principle. However, when it comes to the inheritance for the children, divide it among the three of them. This is my request to my wife. I wish for the family to live together in harmony. That's my only wish. I'll watch over all of you from above." My mother turned to us and asked, "What shall we do?" My sister and I already had the answer in our hearts. "Let's do as father wished," we replied with a smile. About a month later, my brother visited the family home alone. He and his wife had ended their marriage without any division of property. His ex-wife continued to complain of being deceived, but my brother insisted he never pretended to be a wealthy heir. It seems she had misunderstood on her own. I heard that she is now making her living in the nightlife industry, which was where they had met. This incident turned out to be a significant turning point for my brother. Although it's not certain yet, he seems to be working earnestly at a logistics company, aiming to become a full-time employee. He now brings local specialties to the family home, saying, "It's a present for you, Mom." It's a stark contrast to only returning home when he was in need of money in the past. If our father could see this, he would surely be deeply satisfied, as his final wish was for the family to support each other and live in harmony. "We are going to live in this house as a family. You should be grateful, you know?" My mother-in-law said, looking down at me with a gentle smile. How rude she is. She said that despite the fact that my mother had passed away from illness not long ago, it was certainly unpleasant to hear my mother-in-law, with whom I had no connection, cheerfully talk about renovating the house. She came suddenly, even though the funeral hadn't taken place yet, without offering a single word of condolence. Instead, there she was, talking happily about living with her son, ignoring me as I was consumed by tears. It seems to her the family only includes her son, and I am like an outsider. She waved her hand at me as if she was shooing away a pest. "I'm saying we'll live as a family. Did you think a daughter-in-law with no blood relation would be treated as family? My name is Tracy, and I'm 30 years old. I have an older brother I respect, who is 5 years older than me. We've always been very close, and he has always been there to help me on anything. When I was having trouble with friends in elementary school, he would go directly to them and ask them to be kind to me for my sake. He might be a bit overprotective, but he's a reliable brother who cares deeply for his sister. During my rebellious phase in middle and high school, he often confronted our parents strongly, but he always treated me warmly. He was always there to support me when I was in trouble, a person I could rely on. "Don't worry about what others think. I support you, Tracy," he would say, and I used to be envious of his attitude. He also said, when our father passed away from cancer during my university years, I was truly grateful to my teachers and parents. They were the ones who always thought of me and scolded me as he reflected on his past, which was surprising to hear from my once mischievous brother. It was rare to hear him talk about the past, and it made me want to become a respected figure like his teachers and our parents. This experience nurtured in me a desire to support children in their growth and those facing difficulties, leading me to choose a career in teaching. While everyone around me was busy job hunting, I focused solely on preparing for the teacher recruitment exams. I still remember the surprised look on my brother's face when I passed the exam and told him and our mother, "Congratulations. I never thought you would become a teacher, Tracy. Good luck," he said, supporting me. Despite landing my dream job in teaching, reality was not as sweet as I had expected. I was busy every day with lesson preparations and student guidance, with late work becoming the norm. As remote work became more widespread, those in the teaching profession had no such option, forcing me to commute on crowded trains every morning. Weekends and holidays often required attendance for club activities. Additionally, living independently and managing a household as an adult made me acutely aware of the difficulties of domestic tasks. I remember struggling both physically and mentally in my first year as a working adult. Yet, I felt fulfilled in my role as an educator. As I became more accustomed to my teaching life, I started noticing odd behaviors and words from my mother. Conversations over the phone became difficult, and she would quickly forget things we had just talked about. Concerned, I visited my family home and was shocked to see garbage scattered everywhere. My normally tidy mother was confused about why things had gotten to that point, saying she had forgotten to take out the trash or that she had already cleaned up. Sharing the situation with my brother, we decided to go to the hospital together, where the diagnosis was unexpected. Our mother was diagnosed with dementia. Though it was early-stage mild cognitive impairment, her communication with other people had decreased since our father's passing, and her condition had gradually become more apparent. This situation increased my interactions with my brother and naturally led to more frequent visits to our family home. During these visits, my brother and I often discussed the future. Amidst my busy life, a friend introduced me to Steve when I was too overwhelmed with work and household management to find any personal enjoyment. My friend, insisting I needed time to relax, invited me out for drinks, where I met Steve. He worked for a foreign company and was deeply interested in the international aspect of my job as a French teacher. He was sincere and always prioritized me. The time spent with Steve was a happy moment in my busy days. Just having a meal together for a short while made all the fatigue disappear. I was drawn to him, and after dating for 2 years, on a day that wasn't special, he reserved a private room in a restaurant in New York City for us. Unexpectedly, he gave me a ring and proposed, saying, "I want to make you happy, Tracy. I want to marry you," but I couldn't answer right away. The reason was the anticipated burden of caring for my mother as her condition worsened. Steve was aware of my mother's situation, but I hesitated to involve him in this issue. Nonetheless, he encouraged me, saying, "If you're worried about your mother's situation, don't be. I want to support her together with you." I remember barely being able to say yes through my tears. When I decided to marry Steve at 27, we discussed it in advance and also consulted with my brother about my mother's future. As a result, we decided to build a duplex house where we could live together with my mother, using our marriage as the opportunity. From then on, I started receiving more frequent contacts from my mother-in-law. Before the marriage, my interaction with her was limited to greetings and face-to-face meetings. Initially, I felt her interest was minimal, but I sensed a reason behind her frequent recent contacts. Eventually, it became clear that the main content of these contacts was about the new house we planned to build. "I heard you're building a new house. What's the floor plan like? I'm curious about my son's new home. Can I see it? As soon as we started talking, she made countless suggestions about the house's design, such as the kitchen would be better if it were larger, the staircase would be more suitable here, not there. Why not make the room next to the living room a guest room? Floor heating is a must since this area gets quite cold in the winter. I was uncomfortable with my mother-in-law, who wasn't going to live with us, meddling, but Steve stepped in to mediate to avoid conflict. Despite this, my mother-in-law persistently contacted me directly. Suspecting some ulterior motive, I discussed it with Steve. Your mother's behavior feels like she plans to live there herself. I'm worried she might be plotting something. Even if you talk to her, she contacts me directly, and I don't know how to respond. Yeah, there must be some reason for that. Don't worry, I'll handle it from now on. You can ignore all contacts from my mom, but won't she feel bad about that? It's fine. She's acting out of line. I'll talk to her. However, given her nature, she might try to contact you again. In that case, it's okay to avoid her call and ignore it. With Steve's support, I avoided further contact with my mother-in-law. The house design was finalized, and construction on the new home began. We planned to move into the new house in 6 months, and packing was going smoothly when the contacts with my mother-in-law had almost ceased. Steve informed his mother of the completion date of the new house, but she didn't seem to react much. Half a year passed, and the new house was completed. The first floor was arranged with a living room, kitchen, and a spacious room for my mother, while the second floor was our couple's space with individual rooms. However, by the time the new house was completed, my mother's health had begun to decline. During the day, when we were at work, my mother spent a lot of time alone, and I often came home to find the house in disarray. The doctor had warned that limiting her activities could lead to a rapid progression of her symptoms, so we had her do small tasks during the day. Yet, actions that had been easy for her became increasingly difficult. While she retained her cooking ability, she often left pans on the stove after use. She would forget to add detergent when using the washing machine or add too much, resulting in excessive foam. Despite having the newspaper right beside her, she would complain, "The newspaper didn't come today until the evening." The challenges posed by my mother's condition were countless, and my brother and I decided to use daycare services during the day. At first, my mother was confused by the unfamiliar environment, but having companions during the day gradually made her smile more. When she came home, she would talk about making paper crafts or participating in events at the children's center. My mother gradually adapted to this new routine, and her condition seemed to temporarily stabilize, but it didn't last long. Just 2 years later, my mother seemed to have caught an off-season cold, but ultimately, she passed away from pneumonia. Just maintaining daily life seemed to deplete her strength, and she couldn't eat properly due to a lack of appetite, leading to a weakened immune system. I couldn't stop crying and couldn't recover from the sudden event. Yet, administrative tasks such as contacting the city hall, notifying relatives, and arranging funeral services piled up and waited for no one. As I began to prepare for the funeral, my mother-in-law arrived with a lot of luggage. Seeing her ready to stay over, I was grateful she came to help with the funeral preparations and welcomed her, saying, "Thank you so much for coming during this busy time. Please come in." However, as soon as she stepped inside, she made an unexpected statement. "I will live in this house." Surprised and at a loss for words, I couldn't make a rebuttal when she said, "If you don't like it, you can leave. Steve and I will live here." She said that without a word of condolence. I was utterly confused by her sudden, self-centered declaration. Ignoring my bewilderment, my mother-in-law continued, "I've waited 2 years, and finally, I can live here. How about it? Is the floor plan to my liking?" As she began to walk around the house. At that moment, I understood why she had been contacting us so frequently before. Perhaps she had always intended to move into the home we built. She tried to change the floor plan to her liking and believed that I should receive her instructions rather than Steve, which might explain her persistent contacts. She seemed to have rushed over after hearing about my mother's death from Steve. That's when the shocked Steve said, "Mom, didn't you know? The owner of this house isn't me. It was Tracy's mother." What? Moreover, when Tracy's mother passed away, the heir would be Tracy's brother. What does that mean? My mother-in-law, glaring at me, said, "The homeowner should be the husband. Steve earns more, and your salary couldn't possibly cover the mortgage. You must be relying entirely on Steve's earnings. This house might as well be Steve's." Really, what an incomprehensible daughter-in-law and her family. "What do you think, Steve?" Steve tried to explain. "No, Mom. Listen, it's okay, Steve. Let me explain," I interjected. My mother-in-law turned her sharp gaze from Steve to me and challenged, "What are you trying to say?" "The mortgage is being paid by my brother and me. I cover the payments with my income, and I have never taken money from Steve. Is that true, Steve?" "Yes, it's true." I continued. "When we built this house, we decided it would eventually go to my brother. Now that my mother has passed away, the home will be for my brother, his wife, and her parents to live in," I explained calmly. My mother-in-law was stunned and speechless, but unable to accept the arrangement. She said, "I can't accept that. After living with and caring for your parents, it's natural that it would be my turn next. I've been waiting for this day. This is too unreasonable. You know, I have a lawyer acquaintance. I'll talk to him and proceed with renouncing the inheritance." Of course, we had no intention of doing so, but my mother-in-law was clearly agitated. "My brother will be arriving soon, so let's discuss this again when he's here. I will express my opinion directly to your brother and ask for his renunciation. I'm the type to speak my mind, so my position won't change even when your brother arrives." After this statement, my mother-in-law waited in the living room until my brother arrived. Steve, while confused, repeatedly apologized to me. "Don't worry. It seems she won't be convinced by just my word, so let's talk again with my mother when my brother arrives." Meanwhile, my mother-in-law was on the phone with a lawyer she knew, moving forward with the discussion on renouncing the inheritance. Regarding the renunciation of inheritance, yes, I believe the person in question will agree. Yes, please prepare the necessary documents if there's progress. My mother-in-law spoke politely on the phone. About an hour later, the sound of a car parking outside was heard. My brother had arrived. "Mother, my brother has arrived." As I called out to her, she stood up eagerly, saying, "I will have this house transferred to Steve. Then I can live here," and proceeded to the living room. At that moment, the living room door opened, and my brother appeared. My mother-in-law, about to shout something, took a deep breath and opened her mouth wide. But as she opened her mouth, no sound came out, and she looked surprised, losing her strength and sitting down heavily. In fact, my brother's appearance could be mistaken for someone from the underworld by some due to his quite intimidating look. His hobby is surfing. Furthermore, as he works outdoors throughout the year, his skin is sunburned, and the sun damage has made his hair brittle. As a result, finding hair maintenance troublesome, he chose to have a shaved head. Also, he is tall and has a muscular and sturdy physique. Especially noticeable is an old scar on his forehead. This scar was the result of a fall during his elementary school years. But combined with his appearance, many people mistake it for a scar from a blade. Seeing such a brother in person, my mother-in-law seemed to lose her will and slumped down to sit. "Do you have anything you would like to say about this house?" my brother coldly asked my mother-in-law. No, I had thought I would live here after your mother passed away. But then I heard that you would be living here, and I realized I understood nothing. Did Tracy tell you to live here?" We had a thorough discussion about this house before it was built, so I believe there was no such conversation. He spoke in a firm tone. "No, I misunderstood. Because I was involved in planning the layout with Tracy before the house was built, I assumed I had a right to live here too," my mother-in-law said, clearly confused and looking down. "A right to live here? Does that mean you were offering some sort of support to my sister?" "No, nothing like that. So, without bearing any burden or making any promises, you just assumed you had a right to live here just by offering your opinion on the layout?" "Yes, I'm sorry. It was my misunderstanding." At first, my brother looked at me suspiciously, but he refuted my mother-in-law's unreasonable claim with disgust. However, to my mother-in-law, it seemed more like anger than disgust, and she apologized deeply, becoming surprisingly docile. Just because our mother passed away doesn't mean there was ever a discussion about living with my sisters-in-laws. Right, Tracy? Of course. I never discussed the details of this house with my mother-in-law. I only mentioned it was a house for living together with my mother. As I answered my brother's question, my mother-in-law suddenly covered her face with both hands. I had believed that my son, Steve, was the owner of this house. After caring for your mother, I thought it was my turn to live with you. But taking care of an unfamiliar elderly person is difficult. So I thought I would wait until your mother-in-law passed away. When I received the news of her death from my son, I thought it was my turn and terminated my apartment lease. Now, I have nowhere to go. I didn't expect such a rash action without any promise. Either way, after my sister and her husband move out, this house is intended for us to live in. I'm sorry, but we have no intention of living with a stranger who's been disrespectful to us. Please leave. My mother-in-law might be pretending to be humble, but her words revealed contempt for our mother. My brother, too, avoided yelling directly at my mother-in-law, a figure related to me, but his anger was gradually rising, and his voice became lower and colder. When my mother-in-law looked at us for help, we reiterated that she should leave. Actually, due to Steve's job, we will be moving abroad soon. Yeah, Mom, you know I work for a multinational company, and there's always been a possibility of overseas assignment, right? We've talked about this possibility before. We had decided to continue caring for my mother until we moved abroad, a decision discussed with my brother, and Steve supported it. Unfortunately, with my mother's passing, we will follow the original plan, and my brother and his wife will live here. Such a thing. Seeing the disappointment on my mother-in-law's face, Steve and I exchanged looks. Then sighing, we continued. If you've terminated your apartment and have nowhere to go, how about coming abroad with us? We made the offer to move abroad, expecting her to refuse. You know, I hate flying, right? I don't even have a passport. But if you have nowhere to live, you'll have to find somewhere new. Steve said, looking slightly worried. Still, applying for a passport now would take time, and preparing for an international move can't be done quickly. We're leaving soon, so it's probably impossible. My mother-in-law's previous energy had faded, and she appeared dejected. Seeing this, Steve made a suggestion. Should I talk to John? Wait, I can't go to John's place. Don't contact him. My mother-in-law quickly said. John is Steve's brother. My mother-in-law was eager to live in our house, but adamantly refused to live with Steve's brother, John. But if you have nowhere else to live, what choice do you have? What do you think? As Steve spoke, my mother-in-law, unable to argue, looked down, then suddenly looked up and said, Then, can you just give me money? I absolutely refuse to live with that daughter-in-law. Steve sighed in exasperation as he began to make a phone call. My mother-in-law shrieked, trying to snatch the phone away, but as soon as the call connected, she backed off. It seemed that John's wife had agreed to take my mother-in-law in. Afterward, we hurried to proceed with the funeral preparations and other necessary arrangements, leaving the rest to that side of the family. When my brother and I returned to the living room after finishing our conversation, my mother-in-law was silently sitting on a chair, apparently displeased with the idea of going to John's house. Now we can finally start preparing for the funeral. We still have a little time, so let's get the preparations going and wait, Steve suggested. Agreeing with his proposal, the three of us started listing what needed to be done. An hour passed, and when the doorbell rang, it was John's wife standing at the door. Hi there. She had the appearance of a typical gal from a bygone era, dressed in eye-catching clothes, wearing a top with a deeply open neckline that day. She's straightforward with her opinions and, despite her casual appearance, dislikes in fairness, being both direct and friendly. It seemed she would get along well with my brother. However, my mother-in-law harbored a dislike for her. My condolences for your loss. I rushed over, so please excuse my attire, she said politely. which surprised me a bit. However, as soon as John's wife was led into the living room and saw my mother-in-law, she changed her demeanor and said, "Oh, come on, Grandma. Cut it out already. Don't trouble Steve and Tracy anymore. Let's go home." And she helped my mother-in-law to stand up. Originally, we had discussed living together, so if you had just agreed to that proposal from the start, you might have been spending your days more peacefully by now. The pride of the elderly can be quite formidable. Anyway, excuse us for taking her away. We've caused you enough trouble for today. With that declaration, she took my mother-in-law away promptly, apologizing deeply as they left. Actually, my brother and his wife had been proposing for a while that our mother live with them. Despite her unconventional appearance, she's incredibly caring, and when they got married, she promised, "We'll take good care of her." However, our mother refused to live with her, choosing to live alone consistently. "She's really got a unique personality," Steve said, reflecting on this with a bittersweet smile. "There's goodness at her core, and my brother is also reliable. So it's likely that our mother will find stability in her new home with them." As Steve predicted, my mother-in-law started living with John and his wife without any issues. With John's wife around, it became difficult for her to behave selfishly, and she now seems to be living relatively peaceful days. Perhaps this somewhat strict environment suits her. She's always complaining, but she never actually tries to do anything on her own and doesn't seem to want to live by herself. "She just likes to grumble," Steve said, watching his mother's behavior with a resigned chuckle. "The house we built is now inhabited by John and his wife, according to the plan we had set. It has become a warm space that deepens family bonds, with John's wife's parents recently joining the household, starting a multi-generational living arrangement. As agreed upon from the beginning, the mortgage is now shared between John and his wife's parents. I am currently in Paris, France, where my husband, Steve, was assigned for work. Initially, there was some apprehension about living in an unfamiliar land. Fortunately, my proficiency in French proved to be a blessing, allowing me to quickly adapt and integrate into the local community. Leveraging my experience as a French teacher in the US, I've taken up teaching English in France. The work environment here differs from the US, with reasonable working hours that allow for personal time. With guaranteed weekends off, Steve and I now enjoy much more time together, experiencing new stimuli every day and leading a more relaxed life. Thus, we are spending our days meaningfully in a different environment from the US, learning and enjoying life in a new land.